Okay, so we will get started. This is the SIG Release Deep Dive. We are going to talk about our subprojects and also a working group that we were partially sponsoring. And then hopefully have a bit of a call to action. We need more people involved in our SIG. Oh, introductions. Should go back first. So I'm Tim Pepper. I am a software engineer in the Open Source Technology Center at VMware. I'm active in SIG Release and also SIG contributor experience, among a smattering of other things. And this is, click it on.
Hello.
Or up is on.
Yeah,
there.
Hello, hello. Hi, I'm Stephen Augustus. I am one of the senior cloud native architects at VMware. I'm also a SIG Release chair, SIG Azure, and SIG PM. So.
Oh yeah, I don't know if I mentioned that. I'm a SIG chair for SIG Release also.
Yeah, we're SIG chairs. So.
I've also previously led one of the release teams, the 112 release team, and have carried a number of roles within the release team, which we will be talking about in more detail. But first off, what is SIG Release?
So part of the whole plan around SIG Release is we want to be able to generate Kubernetes releases, right? That's the big thing, right? So SIG Release is often conflated as just the release team, I think, but there are a variety of subprojects that live within SIG Release that we're going to talk about today. So one of them is the release team. SIG Release overall is responsible for generating consistent Kubernetes releases on a reliable schedule. We also want to make sure that there's a consistent body of members dedicated to these roles, right? So whether it be release engineering, whether it be handling the communications around the release team, the CI signal, making sure test infra is in place. So these are some of the roles that we're going to go into, as well as handling licensing.
On the tooling aspect, we'll talk a lot about that more, but one of the things I call out here, like the highlighted stuff is things that we're focused on, but I didn't highlight the D in automated releases because that's fairly aspirational still. We need to put in some work towards automating the releases more so and ultimately automating a lot of human tasks away. And then also in many ways, we don't do a lot of the work that people maybe presume that we do. They think that the release team, for example, does a lot of work, but it's much more partnering with the SIGs and empowering them to identify what they can get done on the timeline that's associated with the release and integrate their work.
So going into the release team is broken into a set of roles, and I think that, as Tim was mentioning, the roles are kind of liaisons into other SIGs, right? So going down the list, we kind of have the enhancements. So I'll do the PM ones first, right? So enhancements and communications are kind of arms of the SIG PM group, where the enhancements lead and enhancement shadows are responsible for essentially collating a list of the open features within Kubernetes and deciding which ones are going to land in the release. So there is a set of, I believe, 142 open enhancement issues. So enhancements are changes in the project that would take multiple release cycles to complete, right? Different from features, which are changes in the project which would only take a cycle to complete, right? So the person responsible for this role essentially collates all of that into a very fancy spreadsheet and coordinates around the various SIGs throughout the release cycle to make sure that those issues are going to land for that release. Do you want to do?
Yeah, so beyond that, there's a number of things that are more the traditional technical roles. So following the CI signal on the master branch or the release branch as we cut that, making sure that our test infrastructure is all stable and good, or any key test changes that are associated with incoming enhancements line up correctly, monitoring for incoming bugs, managing all of the Git operations around branching and moving content onto the release branch, and doing risk management there relative to CI signal. And then also once we have done the release, doing the patch management. And of course, release notes and documentation for all of the things that are in the release. One of the cool things that we've done over the last year, I think, is turn this from sort of anecdote and lore especially held within the minds of a large set of Googlers, into something that's really being run by the community, and these roles have documented responsibilities. So all of that, if you follow that link there, you'll see all of the role handbooks that describe what the roles are. And it's a volunteer process. We're constantly looking for new people to step up. Depending on the role, it can be a significant amount of work for a period of time, and we don't want people to get burned out because that leads to problems for the cadence of the project.
So I think what's kind of interesting there is that within the last few release cycles, we've had the opportunity to do exactly as Tim said, try to automate some of these roles away. And we haven't gotten all the way there yet, but I think that, from the patch release manager role, and as well as I think we're going to do the branch manager for the next cycle, we're starting to pull like those roles out of the release team because they're roles that kind of exist over the, over the life cycle of Kubernetes and not just a single release. And then we got some good news on the test infra side too, that essentially we had automated enough of the test infra role away that it didn't need to be a role on the release team anymore. So starting in 1.16, we're gonna chop that.
And the key here is that this has a quarterly focus. Kubernetes we release on basically a quarterly basis, so a team is coalesced to focus on getting a release out, and then we're repeating that. We'll talk more about that. The next sub-project to talk about is the licensing one, and so I'll kind of set it up a little bit, and then you can talk about where we're going. So you might kind of trivially and naively look at Kubernetes, look on GitHub, and see that it's Apache 2.0 licensed, right? But is it? This is open source. If I go into the code base, I just did this morning during the keynotes to check the numbers on master. There's 226 license files. And trivially, knowing that it's Apache license, right, but I grep for Apache license, I get 11 or almost 12,000 hits on Apache license. And what that is license headers in individual files. And then it's a Go-based project, right? So if you look in GoDeps in the license file, there's a set of concatenated licenses, and looking at the delimiter and just doing a simple grep and word count, I got the impression there's 2,000 distinct licenses in that file, which scares me. But the point here is this is open source. We have to do the right things right. We need to make sure that we're in compliance with whatever all these other licenses are. And that you don't want to, at this scale, you don't want to do manually across all of these vendored GoDeps. So the future.
Yeah, so I think that there are two problems to handle simultaneously, right? So one is the requirement around the CNCF to use certain licenses, right? So there's a set of accepted licenses for CNCF projects, which are Apache 2 primarily, and the CC 4.0 for Creative Commons, right, for documentation. So the second problem is that everything that you use within Kubernetes, it's your vendoring directories, you've got dependencies that have deeper dependencies, and like how do we do the scans? At what point do we say that like we've done enough checking for licenses, right? And we're happy that we're conformant with our license policies. So we're going to be doing that via automation, right? I think that previously, we kind of did it in two ways. We did these find commands and these grep commands across all of the directories. We also have Steve Winslow, who's on the LF side, who uses a tool called Fossology, which ends up coming out into a spreadsheet, and then he collates the spreadsheet and then sends it to us, and then we dedupe it between the two organizations. So it's that can't continue to happen, right? Especially with more than 150 projects within the Kubernetes orgs, right? So we have a tool called Fossa that we're going to be using moving forward, and we've spun up a licensing subproject. So it's myself, Steve on the LF side, Dims, and Nikita. Right. So the idea is to build automation around each of these processes and each of these repos, so that we can move to a point where we can turn on like pre-submit checks, right, for Kubernetes, and being able to say like, hey, you're in license violation, right? You can't even merge this because you're in license violation, right? So that's the future, but there's so many things, right, to get to first.
So call to action if you're a licensing nerd, get involved with this. I know there's probably one in the room. So the next one to talk about a little bit briefly is the working group long-term support. So the link there will jump you off to the details, but to kind of describe what's going on here, I want to make sure that people are clear on the release lifecycle. So we have these quarterly releases that I mentioned, but then there's 9 months of support that follow it, and you have a set of overlapping releases. So 1.14 came out in the spring, 1.15 is going on right now, and 1.16, 1.17 will follow. But each of those get 9 months of patch support. So there's been a question, we hear rumbles of discomfort, I guess, around this. People find it awkward or difficult to upgrade across releases on this cadence. That doesn't necessarily mean, though, that we need a dramatically longer term support, like what people think of as traditional LTS when you hear LTS, like Ubuntu LTS, many years of support. So in Kubernetes, working groups don't own code. They're trying to figure out and propose a solution to a problem. So this working group is trying to drive conversations around what are the actual end user needs, and then with those cataloged, what are our options to match them? So if we really find that people are wanting longer support than this 9-month span, okay, what is that gonna mean? And come up with proposals for the project on how to iterate on that. And maybe the answer ends up being no. We are more or less okay with this, and it's a smaller set of users who are struggling, and maybe then there are still things that we could propose to the project around tooling or improvements to stable APIs, for example, that make it easier for people to upgrade on this cadence. Each of us involved in this work group has some very strongly held opinions that are relatively divergent. It's almost in a way SIG raw tomatoes, like you gotta have your flame suit on. But there'll be more discussion of this specifically tomorrow. There's a deep dive session in the afternoon if you're still around just at the end of the conference, and the link is there.
So the LTS working group and SIGPM kind of worked together during the end of last year to kick out a survey. And are you going to be going over the results?
Tomorrow we'll go into the details of the survey results.
Yeah, so that survey is pretty much everything that Tim just said. So definitely check out that session if you have a chance.
So the big area of work that we have to do is release engineering. So like we talked about, the release team, it's got a time span that's quarterly. Its focus is delivering the next Kubernetes minor release. But there's more to life than that. All of the tooling that is the crank that we turn on a quarterly basis to generate the release needs improvement, both in terms of the mechanism, but also the human processes and the rationale for how, why, when we do things. So what all are we talking about improving there? I want to kind of go through a set of slides that kind of describes where we are. So right now, if you're looking at KK, the Kubernetes master branch, we have a set of great automation really that does build and give CI feedback. But in parallel to that, we have a set of code in the Kubernetes org under the release repo, and that does releases that are targeted for that quarterly minor release, right? The official releases. So you end up with a distinction there between dev and prod, and as most of you all know probably, this is a poor practice to have. You want these two environments to nearly exactly mirror each other, or you run into potential issues. You have test escapes because that thing that you shipped is official prod isn't what you tested on a day-to-day basis. And we have really good CI. We've got periodic and per commit CI going on the dev branch. But on prod, you could almost say it's more like monthly, because
if we're lucky.
Well, our quarterly cadence means that we don't have a release branch until the last month of the release, and then we start running things more often and pulling code in from master kind of on a daily basis, or commits one by one just in the last week. But it's a totally different cadence. Plus, we do patch releases that end up being monthly, roughly, during that 9-month span. So there's this periodic do something on the release branch and see the testing and ship it. But it's completely disjoint from the other.
Yeah, so I think that that's also notable to point out that, as we're going through the, vetting the prod code, it really is a human process more so than the automation that's happening on the dev branch. So that's...
So you get two distinct things here. On the dev side right now, you could argue that that's mostly consumed by automation, and that's the point. Created by automation, testing is the point. You get automated feedback that shows up on a dashboard somewhere. But for prod, the consumers are the users, the end users of Kubernetes. People are downloading the things. The creation is manual, and the testing is kind of spotty. You could almost round it to 0 if you're cynical compared to what's on dev continuously, right? So we have a quality feedback loop on dev, but not so much on prod. So pretty clear problem, right? It's a little worse than that, though, because on dev, we build a set of things, and they go out to a cloud bucket that's, again, consumed by automation. But users don't consume things in that way. We have people who go to our Kubernetes website. They read the documentation. They download specific things. Or they use yum or apt to download binaries from a repo or a container registry to get an official container. And all of those are separate flows than what we have for dev. So you sort of have what is a normal staging here. You have some build and staging and publication, right? What we want to do for the future is still have that normal build, staging, prod, or build, staging, publication set of flows, but have it be a continuum once for dev, and have testing at each of those points. So instead of prod, largely untested, we have that same testing going on for dev. And we have it not just for the automation consumed artifacts, but also for all of the artifacts that are intended for humans. So that you as a human, if you download an RPM, you know that something has actually previously consumed successfully that RPM. And right now, that is a bit spotty.
So I think what's cool about this, this kind of shift into the future is that, we're opening an opportunity for contribution. So if there are release engineering people in the room or listening to the recording later and are interested in working on the subproject, let us know. Two, I think it starts to build the confidence that we have in, I know personally, like when I was an SRE or PE, the idea of consuming a .0 release for something was a little sketchy. The same with like consuming a beta or an alpha, right? So like what we want to be able to do is over time build this confidence in Kubernetes. Like I think that from a community standpoint and from an end user perspective, like Kubernetes is the thing, right? And that's really great. But once you start to dig into some of the internals, you look at the alphas, you look at the betas, and you're like, how can we drive consumption around these things? And I think building a workflow and being really open about the way that we construct that workflow is going to be one of the keys to doing that.
If you think of that problem slide earlier, you can kind of imagine why our .0 releases might have some trouble in terms of that final staging of the artifacts that humans consume. So we want to get to something where creation is entirely automated, consistent across the flow, and as we have things that are validated, they get promoted to the next level of publication or stable usage, and testing everywhere, and then that this is all consistent.
So I think that, I'm not sure if we included in the slides, but we also have a team, right? A team of sorts, right? The Kubernetes Infra team. Right, that is, so we have this concept of working groups. Working groups are multi-SIG events, essentially, to drive down some effort and then kind of turn themselves down, right? So between the Kate's Infra group, release engineering subproject, the kind of the goal of the Kate's Infra group right now is or the Kate's Infra team, is to build infrastructure that lives outside of, that is CNCF-owned infrastructure, right? So the means of production for some of these artifacts are kind of dependent on certain companies. And this is a community effort, right? We want everyone to be able to see how the sausage is made and be able to help make the sausage themselves, right? So
if you go back quite a few years, you would see Kubernetes by Google, TM, trademarked. Like it was, this project started as a Google thing, right? But it's now under the auspices of CNCF, it's community run, but some portion of this release engineering stuff happened on Google machinery with Google people doing things that required Google privs. So we're trying to finish off the decoupling there. And last year in August, Google made a large announcement committing $9 million to the CNCF to enable the CNCF to stand up their own hosting for this stuff and move the last portion of things off. One thing though, in addition to having dev and prod separate, you also sometimes see in poor groups security being an afterthought, and that's also a thing here. We need to have security in this mix and not have it be an afterthought, have it be in the same stable flow and have those security aspects have testing as well. So how to get involved? We have been, maybe to put these slides, or these bullets in slightly different order, the release engineering, like Stephen was mentioning, has been slightly mixed up in that working group Kate's Infra effort, where Google's working to move the test infrastructure out from under them into the community CNCF run. We've sort of been waiting on that because it was almost ready, and we figured if we're going to stand up a new flow, let's just do it on the new infra instead of doing it on the old and migrating it also and being mixed up in there. But that's been a bit slow, and then now we've had sort of the spring conference season where all of the people involved have had their internal dev conferences, and we're all now here at KubeCon, so that slowed things down a little bit. But right after KubeCon, we're all planning on getting a much more concrete issue backlog so it's clear where you could contribute, start having sub-project meetings regularly so you could show up on a Zoom call and be involved in the brainstorming and picking tasks off the backlog and actually starting the actual implementation work.
Yeah, so I think overall, I mean, these conferences are always a good opportunity to be able to sync up with people in person. We've had some good conversations even yesterday with some of the Google release engineers to kind of move this effort forward. So definitely look out for it in the next quarter.
Huge focus on it this next quarter, yeah.
So additionally, prior to KubeCon, this is release wide. If you're interested in getting involved, we did a backlog grooming or initial backlog grooming, and I found 199 issues on our SIG release backlog, right? And then I was like, okay, well, let me create some new project boards, and broke them up into sub-projects, and we're still at like 99 that are top level SIG release. So all of that to say that help is welcome. Feel free to talk to Tim, myself, or Caleb afterwards. So,
if you're passionate about DevOps, GitOps, if you're an SRE, if you have an interest in securing release flows, things like that, we would love to have your involvement. And with that, I think that is our last slide. We've got a little under 10 minutes, I think, for Q&A. Well, since this is being recorded, we'll ask that you raise your hand, and
run the mic.
Stephen will run the microphone around, and we'll try and answer questions.
Can you hear me? Yeah. What skills are required for us to contribute here? For instance, what I need to know in order to be fully functional engineer helping with the backlog? And what meetings are there that I can participate and start learning, for instance?
So first pass meetings, come to the SIG release meeting. It's bi-weekly. If you go to the Kubernetes community org, you'll see there a set of subdirectories per SIG, and SIG release has a directory. The readme.md there has links to the Google group. Join our Google group, and you'll get automatically invited to the bi-weekly Zoom meeting. There's also a link there to the agenda and minutes docs, so you could catch up on things. So that's how to get connected. Specific skills involved. Some of this is going to depend on the particular direction we take on the implementation. So there'd been some discussion initially of writing a tool, for example, for managing how we build the spec files or the packaging metadata for things like RPMs and debs. So if we wrote a tool like that in Go, there'd be some Go, but currently most of the scripting is Bash. But having some awareness of how deb packages are built, using Hannes here in the front a fair amount for that. I'm super familiar with the RPM side, so we sort of bounce things off each other there. So that type of stuff. Container building, there is a new tool that's been created for doing that idea of promotion for container images, and that's written in Go. So a variety of scripting languages, some Go familiarity, some familiarity with packaging across the scheme of things, and then a little bit also sysadmin type of skills around understanding how to manage publication flows and shuffling artifacts around. Right now, a portion of the building happens in GCB, the Google Cloud Build tool. I am open to seeing us change that. I think we should have an open mind as we envision this better workflow to pick the correct tools for the job in a community-based way, where very naturally, and it's totally fine not to ding them for it, the Googlers who've established and run this in the past have done it in a Google native way, but we should have an open mind and try to do what's best for us as a community.
And I think on the more simplistic side, anything in the Kubernetes community kind of requires some time and dedication, so willingness to really dive in and be comfortable with feeling uncomfortable. Occasionally, I think that we have amazing resources to help people get spun up. So even if you don't know some of these tools, you're not familiar with Go, like we have people to point you in the right direction. But the willingness to stick with it for a while is kind of key to the game. So.
As we brainstorm it too, I think having an opinion, but also being willing to change that opinion and being willing and able to read, there's a number of KEPs and Google Docs that describe in very large detail a set of possibilities of tooling and workflows here. So if you have experience in these areas, coming in, being able to constructively, collaboratively share ideas and opinions, but also being willing to merge with others and collectively find the right path forward for this stuff.
Can you talk a bit about shadowing this role when you shadow someone and you get like a better understanding of how it works? It's like an intern side of being part of the team?
Yeah, so for the release team specifically, we have essentially a shadow selection process, and that happens around. So we were trying to start it up around code freeze, which is like the month and change before the release is actually cut. What we've done over the last few cycles is go from a first come first serve process to we've created a questionnaire, like so all the things that all the different skills that you may or may not have, like what roles are you interested in, what is the time commitment, where are you located, just kind of trying to gather a profile on this shadow candidate, right? And then from there, the people who are selected as release team role leads for the next cycle, which are usually the shadows that were from the previous cycle, have the opportunity to then interview the shadows, right, and get an idea of what's going there. I think what's kind of interesting about the release team is that we have you have this problem that you're trying to solve so you're trying to do the thing while learning the thing, while teaching it to someone else. And so it's always like an interesting ride. I think that what I love about SIG Release specifically is that a lot of our processes are pretty well documented, and I think that we constantly empower people every release cycle to rewrite that documentation, to redefine what that policy is, right? So it's never the same every release cycle, right? So that's kind of on the release team side.
One other thing there in terms of a skill, so that I'd mentioned sort of being able to read the docs, and Stephen talked about read and help refine the docs, but if you go back a year, most of these docs didn't exist or were very old and spotty. So we've put an effort into making sure that they're much more documented. But the next step is to bring a mind for automation. So as you're not just exercising the role, teaching the role, learning the role, you're looking to replace anything within that with automation.
And then on the patch release and release engineering side, I think that what we're going to be working on as we firm up some of these policies is actually building a shadow process for that. The tricky thing there is that for the patch release and release engineering, there are certain roles that require a certain level of access to do things, right? And we have to be careful with the way that we onboard people to that process, as well as given the fact that cutting Kubernetes releases also involves liaising with the product security committee, which handles the CVEs that get announced for Kubernetes, right? So it's not that we're unwilling to onboard people to that process, but we have to be careful with the types of people that we onboard to that process and make sure that they're committed and willing to uphold the disclosures process as well as the kind of the values of the community. So.
Most of these roles are areas where individuals who are even earlier career or younger, less experienced engineers could engage and start learning and contributing as well, but especially the patch release team, because we have to do fairly active risk management, looking at what patches we choose to backport and limiting and constraining those. We need a little bit more senior people who are able to understand that and then interact with the security team on inbound CVEs and line things up so that we get a release out the day that we're announcing the CVE.
Yeah, so you said that security and security testing was not quite where you wanted to be yet. Maybe you can say a few words about what are the gaps or the holes, and what's your idea or thinking to try and close those gaps?
My default answer to that is, for anything on security, I want to see the threat model. And we don't have a threat model document. For Kubernetes itself as a project, like a running cluster, we don't yet have a threat model. It's in the works. But then the scope of that initial threat modeling doesn't include the release process. But if we're releasing official binaries that are signed that people are downloading, I don't know that they want to or should run those in production at this point, if they should trust us if they haven't seen our threat modeling or our test proof of the implementation versus that. So that's my base starting point. Let's look at what prospective problems we have and then look at mitigations.
So I think that we've started to document some of, or the product security community has started to document some of the threat model around Kubernetes. But I think that we're largely at the mercy of like unknown unknowns. There are a lot of things that we haven't figured out, and getting everyone into the room at the same time is incredibly difficult. So there are lots of expertise across like EMEA and APAC time zones that we don't always get to liaise with. Also, if anyone is in the European time zones and interested in running SIG release meetings, talk to us.
Our SIG release meetings are Tuesday afternoons Pacific time, which is bad for everybody else in the world, and we need to change that. And I don't know, to capture everybody, and there's so many meetings already in the morning, we may need to split and have sort of bounce back and forth a little bit, but enable all of you Europeans and people from other continents to get involved more easily. We know we need to do that, and hound us, force us to do that. Don't let us not.
So do we have time for one more, maybe?
I think we're basically at time, but if you have other questions, feel free to grab us, and we'd love to chat with you more.
Thank you.
Thank you.